welcome back to my channel. My name is Daniela and today I'm here to tell you about my top 5 books of 2022. Whilst my shelves are full to the brim of fantasy, only actually 2 of my top 5 have ended up being fantasy. We will go from 5 up to number 1, 1 being my favourite, 5 being my least favourite. So at number 5 we have the Heartstopper series. This is a graphic novel series written by Alice Oseman. It features our 2 main characters, Nick and Charlie. It's a coming of age story following these 2 boys throughout school, as one of them is just discovering their sexuality and one of them is struggling with other things. Nick is my favourite character. I absolutely love him. I really loved this series as a whole, but my favourites out of the series were book 1 and book 4, and that is because of some certain scenes, both involving water. If you want a really lovely, heartwarming, coming-of-age story that also tackles some difficult subjects, I highly recommend these graphic novels. They're a quick and easy read. I did borrow these from the library, so I don't have physical copies with me. Previously, the only way to get them in hardcover was through FairyLoot, but that is about to change because they are now releasing hardcover editions of the series. So if you love this series and you want a hardcover copy, maybe have a quick Google for when those are due out. This series made me laugh, it made me cry, it gave me butterflies, it made me giddy, and it was just a really fun time. Next up we have number 4, which is It Ends With Us by Colleen Hoover. I believe this is advertised as a romance, but it is not a conventional romance story. I think all of Colleen Hoover's books have some sort of twist that kind of pulls them out of the romance genre. They do have romance in them, but they also tend to feature something else that is like a heavier topic and maybe difficult to read about depending on your triggers. So always check the trigger warnings if you do have triggers if you're going to pick up a Colleen Hoover book. Another thing I see a lot of is, I see this book a lot in like the young adult or children's section in bookshops, and I'm like, should that be there? I feel like it shouldn't. Does anyone else feel like this is definitely an adult book and should not be put in the kids section? In this book we are following our main character, Lily Bloom, and she meets a guy. We follow from the beginning of the relationship with this guy. We also have flashbacks to her past via her diary. So at some point the diary comes in and we're seeing like the past and the present of Lily's life. This book will make you feel lovely and bubbly for the first half, and then something happens and this book gets flipped on its head, and the next half of the book can be quite difficult to read, but the way it is written was done so well. I absolutely love this book and I was in absolute tears towards the end of this book, even more so when I read the acknowledgements. The acknowledgements made me cry more than the actual book did. I started reading it in the afternoon one day and I could not put it down. I started reading this and I did not stop reading it until I had finished it. I think I finished it at like 1 AM. Technically the following morning, my other half was asleep next to me while I was bawling my eyes out over this book. I mean like full on ugly crying, bawling my eyes out. I feel like anything that can pull on your emotions and get to you and make you ugly cry is, in my opinion, a good book. Everyone is different, everyone will have different things that make them feel a certain way, but for me, this is one of those books, and I very much enjoyed it. And Colleen Hoover has since brought out the sequel, which I own but have yet to read, so I will be doing a reread of this and then reading the sequel, because that features another character who I am so excited to read about after having read this book. Coming in at number 3, we have The House in the Cerulean Sea by TJ Klune. It almost feels like a crime for this book to be at number 3, but these top 5 are just so good that it was so difficult to place them. This book I would describe as a cozy fantasy. It is a hug in book form. It is an adult book, but it has this childish, childlike feel to it, and it kind of makes you just regress, but in a good way. I was laughing at like the most childish things in this book. It brought out the immaturity in me big time. I heavily related to our main character in this book, who is Linus Baker. Linus Baker is a middle-aged man, lives alone at home with his cat. He loves listening to his music and he loves his sunflowers that he grows on his front lawn. Linus Baker is a man who likes to go to work. He's very strict. He doesn't get emotionally attached to anyone at work. He works for the department in charge of magical youths. He's very professional, he's a stickler for the rules, and he gets put on a very secret assignment. he has to go travel to this island and look at this orphanage, and he has to send reports back to upper management about the orphanage and the way it's being run. Obviously, the children at the orphanage are magical youths, so they're all very individual, they have their very own personalities. Linus goes to spend time with these youths and the owner that takes care of them at the orphanage, who is called Arthur Parnassus. We follow Linus, and during his time at the orphanage, let's just say the people at this orphanage have a big impact on Linus. I loved everything about this book. This book was so fun. I was smiling from ear to ear all the way through. I was concerned I wasn't going to enjoy this book just because it was very hyped up at the time that I'd read it, and lots of people love it, and I absolutely understand why. I read this book at the start of the year and I have not stopped thinking about it, and I definitely plan to reread it. This is a 5-star read. If you're into fantasy and you need something to cheer you up, make you feel a bit better, because I'm definitely struggling with the January blues. I always do. If you need something to like pull you out of yourself a bit and just make you feel good, this is the book. In second place, I'm gonna have to say a whole series. In 2022, I read books 1 to 7 of the Throne of Glass series. I've yet to read the 8th book. I'm kind of putting it off. I need to stop because it has been months since I read book 7. I kind of don't want it to end. I'm so scared for what's going to happen in book 8. But of those 7 books I read in the Throne of Glass series, we're giving the top spot to Queen of Shadows. There were moments in this book that featured my favourite characters and our main characters, because my favourite is not the main character. And there were moments that just had me on the edge of my seat and like just wanting to scream. They were so good. Another favourite of mine from Throne of Glass is Crown of Midnight. Crown of Midnight is the 3rd book if we're taking the novella as book 1. I highly recommend reading the novella as book 1, by the way. I really, really loved the first book, and I feel like the rest of the series just is so much better having read that. I can't imagine reading it without having read that. But anyway, Crown of Midnight, this is the 3rd book. There is a reveal in this. I didn't know anything about this book when I went into it, and the reveal was so good for me. Like, I was so excited. I didn't know anything about the series, so it was a complete shock for me. I was so hyped after reading this book. I finished this book late at night and I could not sleep. I was so excited. This is a fantasy series. It is so, so good. If you like Sarah J Maas's writing, I highly recommend this. If you have read ACOTAR and you loved it for the plot and the fantasy world, Throne of Glass is amazing. This is not so much about the romance as far as I'm concerned. This is more about plot. I definitely need to do a reread and tab these books, but I need to finish the last book first. In 2023, I assume this series is going to break my heart. And finally, for my top spot of the year, my number 1 book of 2022, and it's going to have to be a full series again, but I will tell you which book is my favourite. It is the Beartown series by Fredrik Backman. I love these books so much. I read Beartown, which is the first book in the series, and I read Us Against You, and I read these in January of 2022. I then reread them in September because the 3rd book in the series was released, which is The Winners. I reread these 2, I tabbed them. I love the characters in these books. I love these books so, so much. And this book broke my heart. I'm still damaged from reading this book. I don't think I'll ever get over this book. And I don't like how this book ended. That's all I'm gonna say. I love the books. I love the series. It's not a bad book. I just don't like how it ended. I just don't. Let me tell you a little bit about these books. These books are contemporary / literary fiction. Beartown is our setting. Beartown is this small town in the middle of nowhere, in the woods, in this cold, icy, snowy area of Sweden. And it's a very small town. There's another town quite nearby called Hed, and these towns don't have much to show for themselves. Their main love is hockey. All of the town is obsessed with their town's hockey team. And the books kind of revolve around this hockey team and sport and the way the townspeople feel about it, but it also delves into the lives of all of the people that live in Beartown. There are a lot of characters in this book. You will be introduced to many a character. They're all important, and you will eventually get a grasp of who everyone is. So just stick with it. It might feel a little slow to start with, getting acquainted with everyone, but it is so worth it. So in these books, we're following the children, but we're also following the parents and the rest of the people in the town. We're getting everyone's perspective. We're getting a little bit of everyone. And this book is more about people than it is about sports. And about halfway through this book, something happens. If you have triggers, you may want to look up trigger warnings for this book because it can be a difficult topic, can be something that's difficult to read about, but something happens about halfway through this book and the residents of Beartown are left reeling from this event, and they all deal with things in a very different way. And we're going to see the fallout of this event and how people deal with it. And that is what the second half of this book is about. We then have Us Against You, which follows on directly after where Beartown ends. By the time you get to Us Against You, you kind of know who all the characters are. Some more characters will be introduced in Us Against You, but for the bulk of it, you know all the characters, you kind of know a lot about them. Fredrik Backman manages to somehow give you so much information about a character just through like certain things they say and certain things they do, and you just feel like you know these characters. The way he writes as well, he gives you a small piece of information up front at the start of every book. He'll tell you a specific thing is going to happen, and you'll be left sat reading this book thinking, is it this? Is it this person? It's very exciting, it's very engaging because the whole way through it's kind of like a mystery and you're kind of waiting to find out, but it's so engaging. The way he writes is so, so beautiful. I'll just read you a couple of my favourite quotes from Beartown. A simple truth, repeated as often as it is ignored, is that if you tell a child it can do absolutely anything, or that it can't do anything at all, you will in all likelihood be proven right. I like to call these Backmanisms because they're just little wise snippets from Fredrik Backman about life, and I just think they're great. There are few words that are harder to explain than loyalty. It's always regarded as a positive characteristic because a lot of people would say that many of the best things people do for each other occur precisely because of loyalty. The only problem is that many of the very worst things we do to each other occur because of the same thing. One from Us Against You. None of these are spoilery. Two drowning people with lead weights around their ankles may not be each other's salvation. If they hold hands, they'll just sink twice as fast. In the end, the weight of carrying each other's broken hearts becomes unbearable. Another one is, cynicism is simply a chemical reaction to too much disappointment. There were some quotes for you without giving any spoilers away. I love how he writes. I'm obsessed. And finally, we have the winners. This is huge. This is a big book. I did not tab much in this. I think, I was dealing with the trauma of trying to read this book. I did really struggle with this. I think I read like the first half and then I just put it down and I was putting it off. I didn't want to read the ending. I didn't want to know what happened just based on the first line in the book. I just couldn't do it. I couldn't do it to myself. Like, the first half of this book was stressful enough, but then the second half, oh my gosh. I read the second half in 2 days, so that's like 300 pages. It's a 600-page book, and I've never cried so much in my entire life, ever. My eyes were so sore when I finished reading this book. I was exhausted. I was physically exhausted from reading this book. But it is so worth it. Like, I love these books so much. Maybe I just like pain. This one follows on from the end of Us Against You. I think it goes forward a little bit. Maybe 6 months. I can't remember. Fredrik Backman kind of wraps everything up with this book. He kind of gives us a glimpse into the future of all of our characters, kind of wraps things up for us, kind of tells us where people are left, what kind of happens with them going forward in life. I will never forget these characters. Like, I will be rereading these books again because I am so in love with this town and these characters in this town and the way Fredrik Backman writes about them. And I'm really sorry that I can't tell you much about it. I just don't want to spoil any of it. It's just so good. If you like books that make you feel emotions, lots of emotions, angry, sad, happy. I laughed during this book. I barely laughed during this book, but I was also left traumatized. This was an emotional roller coaster. I'm laughing, I'm crying, I'm laughing, I'm crying, I'm laughing, I'm crying. I was all over the place. I just don't really know what else to say about these books other than I love them with my whole heart. They're an emotional roller coaster. They'll give you all the feelings. There are so many characters, but we somehow managed to feel like we know and understand all of them in so little words. You feel like the residents of Beartown are a part of you. If you want something that's going to make you feel all the feels, read these books. There's something in here for everyone, and I highly recommend them. That was my top 5 books of 2022. I only wanted to do top 5 because although I gave other books 5 stars, they didn't excite me the way that these books did. I love them so much. They are so good, and I highly recommend you read them. If there's anything that sounded like it was up your street, please pick them up. They are so good, I promise you. Let me know what your favourite books of the year were. Have you read any of the books that I've mentioned? What did you think of them? If you're a silent watcher and you don't tend to comment, leave me a little stack of books emoji and let me know that you were here. I hope you enjoyed this video, guys. If you did, as always, please give it a big thumbs up and subscribe to the channel if you haven't already. And I will see you next time.